Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere strange, up, way past the clouds, to the top of a jagged mountain where the air smells like burnt incense and egos. You're standing on Mount Olympus, home to the ancient Greek gods, and honestly, it's a little underwhelming. Marble columns everywhere, yes. Glowing thrones? Sure. But it's quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet where every cough echoes for eternity, and Hera is definitely judging your outfit. There's Zeus over there, still doing his whole "I control the sky" routine, sending a lazy flick of lightning now and then just to remind everyone he's the guy. Poseidon's pouting in a corner because no one brought any seaweed snacks. Athena's reading a scroll the length of a horse. You're standing awkwardly, hoping someone will say something that's not in iambic hexameter. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. Olympus runs on divine time, which is basically whenever Zeus wakes up. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle through the wide marble courtyard, sandals scuffing against stone that's technically older than written history. The clouds around Olympus puff lazily like they've also given up trying to be majestic. The gods are sitting around a golden table, and no one's talking. You spot Ares sharpening a blade just to hear the sound. Apollo's tuning his lyre for the 17th time. You get the sinking feeling that even they're sick of each other. Turns out, immortality is a long, long time. And when you've already seduced mortals, started wars, transformed into swans, and punished 100 arrogant humans for petty offenses, well, there's not much left to do but compare thunderbolt sizes. This is where boredom lives, on an immortal mountain surrounded by unchanging perfection. No weather shifts, no awkward mortal moments, no unexpected plot twists. Just celestial routine. Occasionally, Hermes tries to stir things up by showing everyone a mortal meme or two, but even that novelty wore off 3 centuries ago. Historians still argue whether Olympus was ever meant to feel so mundane, or if that's just what happens when you make your pantheon too perfect. Either way, something's got to give. You wander past the banquet table, one of those eternal feasts where the food never spoils, the wine never spills, and the conversation never starts. Hera eyes you, probably wondering who let you in. You wave and pretend you belong, as if crashing a divine family reunion is just part of your Tuesday. Then you hear sandals slapping against stone behind you. Louder than yours. Too loud for someone trying not to get noticed. You turn, and there he is, Dionysus. He's holding a goblet that looks like it's been refilled mid-sip. His eyes twinkle in a way that says, "I've had exactly the right amount of wine to make this interesting." His robe is a little askew. His crown of ivy keeps slipping. You can tell he hasn't sat still in centuries. Dionysus plops down next to Apollo with a little too much enthusiasm, spilling some wine onto Apollo's scroll. Apollo doesn't react, he's seen this move before. It's their unspoken ritual. Every gathering, Dionysus tries to bring chaos. Every time, the others refuse to play. You watch Dionysus scan the room, looking for something, anything, to spark life into this scene. His fingers twitch, like he's trying not to drum on the table. His smile flickers, briefly, then disappears under a sigh. You're witnessing something rare here, a god who's fed up with divinity. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact to sprinkle in your dreams tonight. The ancient Greeks really did imagine Olympus as a place where gods lived like a divine version of an elite HOA, rules, rituals, and very little risk. The gods had their domains, their sacred symbols, and their sibling rivalries, but rarely anything new. And here's your fringe tidbit. Some fringe scholars believe Dionysus was originally a mortal hero who got deified later, snuck into the pantheon like a divine intern who stayed too long and made it awkward. That could explain why he never fully blends in, why he's more party than prophecy. Back on Olympus, Dionysus swirls his goblet and suddenly laughs. No one knows why. It's one of those laughs that makes you nervous, like he just remembered something chaotic and is planning a sequel. You inch closer, drawn in by his odd energy. He looks right at you. Yes, you. Don't you get bored? He asks, not really expecting an answer. You nod, because yeah. Even as a mortal, standing around watching ageless beings do nothing gets old fast. Dionysus leans in like he's about to tell you a secret, then promptly gets distracted by a beetle crawling across the table. He names it, Phil, and gives it half a grape. This is a god who invented wine and madness, who inspired frenzied dancing and illusion, and yet, on this marble mountain, he's just another divine houseplant wilting in the shade of Zeus's ego. But not for long. Because tonight, you're going to see what happens when one bored god decides the universe needs something new. Something messy. Something tragic and ridiculous and wildly human. Theater. You're still standing beside Dionysus, who has now climbed onto the table for no reason other than gravity is a suggestion. He's holding his goblet like a scepter. You expect another toast, another incoherent poem, maybe another beetle name. But instead, he just sighs and says, "What if we told stories on purpose?" Everyone ignores him. You don't. Because something in that sentence sounds dangerous. New. And the mountain shifts, just slightly, like the world is about to get a plot. Dionysus jumps off the table like he's invented the concept of landing. His robe flares behind him, too dramatic to be accidental, and for a moment you're sure he poses at the bottom just in case anyone's looking. No one is. Not even Ares, and Ares usually loves a good entrance. You trail behind him as he weaves through marble corridors of Olympus, murmuring to himself. Stories, he says. But with roles. And rehearsal. And betrayal. You're not sure if he's describing a new invention or last week's family drama. He stops at a balcony that overlooks the mortal world below. Clouds swirl beneath your feet. The earth spins slowly, far below. Dionysus sips from his goblet and squints. They look so busy down there, he mutters. Running around. Crying over things. Falling in love with the wrong people. Dying. Being reborn. So messy. He glances back at you, smirking. We don't get that up here. We just sort of exist. You realize this isn't just boredom. It's longing. Dionysus, the wine god, the reveler, the patron of wild things, wants to feel something. And when you've outlived everything worth drinking and dancing over, what's left? Well, maybe you create something new. Historians still argue whether Dionysus was always associated with theater or if that came later, a kind of divine rebranding when the cults needed better merch. But the connection stuck: wine and masks, revelry and performance, madness and meaning. As you float alongside Dionysus, he begins to tell you his story, not the official version, but the one that smells like olives and heartbreak. He was the new god, remember? The 11th hour addition to Olympus. The half-blood son of Zeus and a mortal woman, Semele. Born in fire after his mother was incinerated by Zeus's divine presence. Yeah, family trauma runs deep here. Zeus, in a rare fit of guilt, stitched the fetus of Dionysus into his thigh. That's right. You were technically born from a leg. If your own birth was dramatic, just know Dionysus one-upped you before you even existed. You were hidden away in secret places. Raised by nymphs. Taught strange magics. And you never forgot your mother, burned to ash by divine truth. That kind of origin? It sticks with you. That's why, even now, Dionysus seems a bit off. He never settled into Olympian smugness. Never found joy in lightning bolts or polished thrones. He preferred caves to palaces. Forests to courts. Chaos to order. You start to get the sense that he doesn't just want humans to perform their feelings, he needs them to prove they're real. That pain and joy and jealousy and awe mean something. Wine, he says suddenly, as if remembering a punchline you missed, was just phase 1. You're not sure if he's joking. He points to a city below, nestled against the sea. Athens. Bright rooftops, bustling streets. People arguing in marketplaces and singing in the dark. Dionysus grins. They still think the gods are above them, he whispers. Maybe it's time they tried being us. You blink. You mean worship? No, he says. Pretending. And with that, he descends. It's not dramatic. No lightning or peacocks. Just a barefoot god stepping down from Olympus like someone's finally handed him a decent script. You follow, of course. You're part of this now. And down below, on earth, the air smells different. Like roasted lamb, wet stone, and questions no one dares to say aloud. Dionysus walks among the people in disguise. Always in disguise. A traveler. A stranger. Sometimes a woman. Sometimes an old man. Always on the edge of recognition. Mortals love a mystery. And Dionysus? He's the most human god they've ever not quite met. Now here's a historical tidbit to chew on as you settle into your blanket. Many Greek plays were performed during festivals to Dionysus, particularly the city Dionysia in Athens. This wasn't just theater. It was sacred. Competitive. Civic, emotional. Imagine if the Oscars were a religious rite and every nominee had to channel divine madness just to qualify. As Dionysus slips through the streets, he listens. To gossip. To tragedy. To laughter in dark alleyways. He files it all away like a playwright hoarding inspiration. And slowly, he starts whispering ideas to mortals. Wouldn't it be strange, he murmurs to one poet, if a queen murdered her husband with a net? To another, what if a man slept with his mother, but no one knew until it was too late? To a third, what if we made them cry, on purpose? You can't tell where his influence ends and human imagination begins. That's kind of the point. Dionysus doesn't force theater into the world. He tempts it. Coaxes it. Like grapes ripening in the sun, stories start to grow under his touch. Here's your quirky tidbit: in some cults, Dionysus was worshipped in a state of ecstatic possession. People would dress in animal skins, dance wildly, and sometimes, accidentally, compose spontaneous poetry. The original improv theater, if you will, with fewer black turtlenecks and more goat masks. You notice that he doesn't stay in one place for long. A tavern here. A temple there. A roadside festival with flutes and frenzied clapping. He's gathering momentum, like a rolling amphora of potential chaos. The gods above don't notice. Or if they do, they think it's beneath them. But you see it now. Dionysus is laying the foundation for something radical. A way for humans to wear masks, speak truths, and shatter silence. Not just for worship. Not just for entertainment. But for survival. Because mortals, unlike gods, don't live forever. They need to feel things deeply while they still can. And Dionysus, strange and brilliant and bored out of his divine skull, wants to help them do exactly that. You watch as he climbs onto a stone bench in the agora, raises a hand, and shouts a line that doesn't make sense yet: "Who will play the king tonight?" No one answers. But soon, they will. A slow hush falls over the square as Dionysus stands tall on that cracked stone bench, his ivy-crowned silhouette framed by the fading sun. The crowd's not huge, just a few market-goers, some old philosophers clutching figs, and a trio of teens who were definitely about to cause mild trouble, but they're watching now. "Who will play the king tonight?" he repeats, louder this time, stretching the final word like honey over fire. Someone snickers. Someone else shuffles away, suddenly remembering urgent pottery-related tasks. But one boy, barely 17, doesn't move. He cocks his head. "You mean, pretend?" Dionysus grins like he's been waiting for this exact response since the dawn of civilization. "Yes. Pretend. But so well that people believe you." The boy's name is Nicandros. His tunic's too big, and he's got the nervous hands of someone who's never been in charge of anything. Dionysus tosses him a woven circlet of olive branches and says, "Congratulations, Your Majesty." Nicandros catches it, stunned. And like that, theater begins, not in a grand marble amphitheater, but on a dusty street corner, with a bored god, a half-curious crowd, and a teenager who just got crowned king for the next 5 minutes. You settle on a stone step, watching the moment stretch. People pause, whisper, point. Nicandros clears his throat. Bring me my dinner," he tries, and a few people chuckle. But Dionysus claps like it's the climax of an epic. "Louder," he cries. "Say it like you mean it. Say it like it's the last thing you'll ever command." Nicandros tries again, this time with a wobble of false authority, "Bring me my dinner." And the crowd laughs, harder this time. The laughter isn't mocking. It's joyful. It's relieved. As if they didn't know how much they needed this until right now. Historians still argue whether the earliest performances were scripted or improvised, whether they stemmed from ritual or rebellion. But what's certain is that something clicked when humans first stepped into borrowed shoes and told a story not their own. Dionysus wasn't done. He spun tales on the spot, coaxing volunteers to play queens and traitors, rebels and heroes. He whispered plot twists into their ears, delighting when they flinched or shouted or burst into dramatic monologue. The people watched, spellbound. And then? They applauded. You could see it in their faces, that spark of transformation. That flicker of what else could we become, just for a little while. Theater, Dionysus explains later, to you, of course, you're the only one who follows him closely enough to catch the good parts, isn't just about pretending. It's about revealing. It's taking the chaos inside and putting it on a stage so that everyone sees it and no one has to feel alone in it. You sit beside him on a rooftop that night, the city glittering below. Do you think they'll keep doing it, you ask? He sips his wine and smirks. Oh, they'll do it until they forget who they really are. Then they'll need it even more. Here's a solid historical fact for tonight. Early Greek theater was deeply tied to religious festivals, especially those celebrating Dionysus. Whole cities would shut down for days as performances unfolded. Citizens were expected to attend, not just for entertainment, but as a civic and sacred duty. Theater wasn't optional, it was divine therapy. And now, for your strange but true side note, some scholars believe the first actors wore actual animal entrails as costumes during primitive ritual performances. Imagine trying to hit your dramatic mark while wrapped in goat intestines. That's commitment. Or a health violation. Back on the ground, Dionysus is gaining followers. They call themselves performers, though no one quite knows what that means yet. Some bring masks made of bark or clay. Others memorize lines whispered in dreams. They perform in marketplaces, on temple steps, by riverbanks, anywhere people gather. And always, Dionysus watches, unseen but not unfelt. One night, he teaches them something new, the chorus. It happens during a play where no one could remember their lines. Total disaster. So he jumps in, has them all chant together, sing a simple rhythm that fills the silence. The audience leans in, hypnotized. They don't need to understand the words, he tells you later. They just need to feel the rhythm. It's the first time anyone realizes that even confusion can be beautiful if enough people believe in the moment. By now, even the other gods are noticing. Hermes visits first, pretending it's casual. Heard you've been stirring up some drama down here, he says, twirling his caduceus. Guilty, Dionysus replies, pouring him wine that makes Hermes forget his own name for 2 days. Then Athena shows up, arms crossed, annoyed but curious. She watches a street performance in silence, then mutters, well, at least they're learning about consequences. Even Zeus pauses during one of his eagle transformations to frown in mild interest. But none of them really understand what Dionysus is doing. Because it's not just about plays. It's about giving mortals a mirror. A mirror that doesn't reflect how they look, but who they are under the skin. Under the crown. Under the pretense. And you? You've become part of the crowd now. Sometimes you help build makeshift stages. Sometimes you cue actors with a cough or a whistle. You've even stepped in once or twice when someone forgot their cue. You're watching something sacred being born, but it doesn't feel like ceremony. It feels like mischief. Like risk. Like living. And that's exactly how Dionysus wants it. One night, as the moon climbs high and the masks come off, you ask him, what's next? He looks at you, wine-dark eyes glinting. We build something permanent, he says. Something massive. With real seats. With an altar. With rules so we can break them. You shiver, not from cold, but from the feeling that something truly strange is coming. Something that will outlive gods. It starts with a rock. A simple one, big enough to sit on, flat enough to stand atop dramatically. Dionysus circles it like it's sacred. Which, in a way, it is, because it's the first piece of what will eventually become the theater of Dionysus. He drags you up the Acropolis before sunrise, barefoot and whistling. This, he declares, planting a wooden mask into the ground like a flag, is where they'll come to cry on purpose. You glance around. At this hour, Athens is more shadow than city. Below, fishermen are just beginning to stir. Bread ovens hiss. A few goats look skeptical. Dionysus spreads his arms. Can't you feel it? The tragedy? The potential? You feel something, all right. It might be existential dread. It might be last night's figs. But you nod anyway, because when a god asks if you feel the divine vibe, you say yes. This is where it escalates. No more street performances. No more wandering festivals. Dionysus wants a stage. A real one. With seats and acoustics and the kind of architecture that makes even the boring monologues sound profound. Historians still argue about when the first true theaters were built, but the theater of Dionysus in Athens? It's one of the earliest, carved right into the slope of the Acropolis. It could seat up to 17,000 people, 17,000. That's more than most TikTok stars get in their comments, and this was live. But right now, there's just the rock. And your sore feet. And Dionysus grinning like a kid planning a prank that ends with a standing ovation. He begins gathering craftsmen. Not architects, storytellers who happen to know how to shape stone. Masons who've seen their lives play out in silence and are ready to hear them echoed back. Every stone laid is a choice. Every tier of seating a challenge to the gods of balance and acoustics. They build slowly. Carefully. You help carry wood planks, trip over hammers, try not to ask why everything smells vaguely of goat. There's no blueprint. Just Dionysus's vision, a place where humans can explode safely. Laugh until it hurts. Hurt until it feels holy. You overhear him talking to one of the builders. They think it's for entertainment. He snorts. But it's therapy. Ritual. Rebellion in a mask. The builder just nods. No one really argues with Dionysus. As the skeleton of the theater rises, the rehearsals begin. Dionysus, ever the improviser, hosts midnight workshops for budding tragedians. People bring scraps of poetry, awkward speeches, half-baked ideas. Dionysus listens, then rewrites their lives in a way that makes them gasp. Too many gods in this one, he mutters one night, scratching out a line. Isn't that ironic, coming from you, you ask? Please, he says, rolling his eyes. I'm barely a god anymore. I'm a casting director with a hangover. And still, people come. Soon, a new tradition forms, the dithyramb. Choral songs sung in honor of Dionysus, often led by 50 men in robes, dancing and chanting. They perform in a circle, moving like wind through tall grass, voices weaving through each other until they blur into something greater. Something ancestral. Mainstream fact for your bedtime brain, the dithyramb was one of the key origins of Greek drama. Poetic, musical, intense, like slam poetry, if slam poetry involved more sandals and fewer YouTube uploads. Also, weird side note. Some historians think the word tragedy comes from tragoidia, meaning goat song. No one knows exactly why. Maybe the prize for winning early performances was a goat. Maybe goats just scream theatrically. Historians still argue whether that etymology was meant to be funny or just weirdly accurate. You've started to memorize lines in your sleep. Everyone has. Even the fishmongers recite soliloquies while gutting mackerel. The whole city is buzzing with plot twists. But here's the twist no one saw coming. Dionysus begins to disappear. Not forever. Just, in bursts. One day he's leading a rehearsal, the next he's vanished into the hills, or disguised as a grape farmer, or sailing to an island to start a new cult. He returns days later with fresh ideas and fresh wine, as if he's been on a divine writer's retreat. He tells you over olives one night, if I stay too long, they forget it's their story. But isn't it your theater? He shakes his head. I just gave them the mirror. They decide what to show. You think about that as the final stones are laid. The stage is now real. You can stand on it. Echo your words to an empty audience and imagine their future applause. It smells like hope and sweat and anticipation. Opening day is set during the festival of Dionysia. A full-blown civic holiday. Think Mardi Gras meets a TED Talk, plus animal sacrifices and possibly someone vomiting from too much fermented honey. Priests bless the altar. Actors paint their faces. Masks hang on racks, grinning and snarling. The city fills with people, citizens, foreigners, skeptics, poets, merchants, lovers, children. All gathering for the first official performance. Dionysus watches from the back, cloaked. You spot him easily. He's the only one drinking wine like it's a religious rite, which, okay, fair. The chorus begins their chant. The actors enter. The first lines are spoken. And Athens holds its breath. The play is a tragedy. Of course it is. About a king doomed by fate, a queen too clever for her own salvation, a city crumbling under secrets. By the end, half the audience is weeping. The other half looks like they've been physically struck. And Dionysus? He just smiles. Like he's waited thousands of years for this one exact hour. That night, as the city sleeps under the flicker of oil lamps and dreams of divine betrayal, you ask him, was it everything you hoped? He doesn't answer right away. Then, softly, it was real. And somehow, that's enough. The next morning, the theater smells of trampled earth and spilled wine. You sit on a cool stone seat near the front row, letting your fingers trace the ridges worn by bodies who leaned forward in suspense just hours before. Dionysus appears beside you like a breath of wind, barefoot again, robes wrinkled, eyes bleary but satisfied. Well, he yawns, I guess mortals can be dramatic. You give him a look. You invented drama. He grins without opening his eyes. I know. That's what makes it fun. Now that Athens has had its first taste of structured storytelling, they want more. Not just tragedy. They want variety. Lightness. Irony. Maybe a goat that sings about taxes. So, Dionysus obliges. He invents comedy. Not the knee-slapping, laugh-track kind you'd expect. This is the raw stuff. Satirical. Ridiculous. Almost illegal. It pokes at politicians, parodies myths, and yes, features actors in phallic costumes because apparently that never gets old. One of the first comedies mocks a local judge known for his overly poetic sentencing. For the crime of stealing olives, I sentence you to write a love poem to your mother's donkey. The audience loses it. Mainstream historical fact, comedic plays were a huge part of Athenian theater, especially during the city Dionysia and Lenia festivals. The two major genres, tragedy and comedy, were performed in competition, with playwrights awarded prizes and lifelong bragging rights. And your fringe fact of the evening? Some early comedies were so raunchy that they included actual, live animal noises and synchronized flatulence as part of the soundscape. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether that was symbolic or just a sign of unfiltered creative energy. You help paint masks that night, broad grins, gaping mouths, grotesque caricatures. Dionysus insists they must be larger than life. He gestures dramatically. No one wants to watch themselves on stage. They want to watch their neighbor. The masks go on, and the personalities come out. You see a quiet baker transformed into a gibbering fool. A stern merchant becomes a dancing satyr. It's not about hiding, it's about revealing something that wouldn't dare show itself in daylight. And then come the playwrights. They arrive like storm clouds, moody, brilliant, and always 5 minutes late. One wears a laurel wreath as if it grew there naturally. Another carries scrolls like they're sacred relics. There's one girl who doesn't speak, just sketches scenes in charcoal on parchment. Dionysus loves her the most. They're the new priests, he says. Storytelling is the new temple. They compete fiercely, each debuting new works at the festivals. Tragedians like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides begin to emerge. They take what Dionysus planted and sculpt it into emotional cathedrals. Their scripts are wild. Gods disguised as beggars. Mothers married to sons. Heroes torn apart by oaths they don't remember making. You wonder how much of it is fiction, and how much is just ancient gossip with better costumes. There's a long night when Dionysus hosts them all for a drunken symposium. They lie on couches, wine-drunk and breathless, arguing about whether words or silence is more powerful on stage. Silence is the loudest thing, Sophocles slurs, eyes closed. No, Euripides counters, words are weapons. Silence is surrender. They fall asleep mid-debate. Dionysus just watches them, amused. They'll never agree, he murmurs to you. But they'll keep writing. You help transcribe a few of their works, ink-stained fingers, parchment rolled with reverence. Each play becomes a kind of sacred blueprint, performed again and again, until the stories themselves start to feel inevitable. But not everyone's thrilled. A local philosopher, Socrates, is famously unimpressed. He says theater misleads the soul. It's illusion, he warns, and illusion is dangerous. Dionysus laughs so hard he snorts wine through his nose. Of course it's dangerous, he says. So is truth. There's even a performance where a character plays Dionysus himself, portrayed as whiny and unsure. Instead of smiting the playwright, Dionysus claps the loudest. Finally, someone's paying attention. People start noticing strange side effects. After watching a tragedy, citizens walk home in silence, hand in hand with people they barely knew before. Farmers recite lines to their goats. Judges reference play characters in legal decisions. One soldier refuses to go to war because he saw a drama where the hero died for nothing. Theater is changing Athens. It's making people feel. Which, depending on your political leaning, is either miraculous or mildly terrifying. One day, you find Dionysus alone in the theater. He's sitting on the stage, staring at the empty seats. "You okay?" you ask. He nods. "I just wonder what happens when they forget." Forget what? That it was never meant to be perfect. Just honest. There's a pause. Then he adds, they'll start rehearsing more. Trimming the wild parts. Making it polished. Safe. And safe theater is just politics in a mask. You sit beside him. The marble is warm under you. The silence feels like a shared secret. Then he stands, stretches, and announces, "We need more chaos." And that's how the satyr play is born. Part comedy, part tragedy, all mischief. Think, tragedy's drunk younger cousin who crashes the wedding and starts reciting limericks. Satyr plays feature chorus members dressed as, you guessed it, satyrs, half man, half goat, all trouble. They dance. They joke. They make fun of the very tragedy the audience just wept over. A playwright once finishes a devastating three-part tragedy and then immediately stages a satyr play where the same hero slips on a wine jug and accidentally invents democracy. The whiplash is jarring. The crowd loves it. You ask Dionysus if this isn't going too far. Too far, he echoes. Darling, we haven't even started. He's planning something bigger. Something that goes beyond Athens. A traveling troupe. A theatrical cult. A way to spread chaos and catharsis across the known world. But that's for later. For now, he leans back on the stage and whispers, imagine a world where everyone gets to play pretend. Even the ones who think they're above it. And you do. By the time the third Dionysia festival rolls around, the theater has become a beast of its own. People camp outside for seats. Bakers sell honeyed figs in the aisles. Pickpockets treat it like a goldmine, though somehow everyone still considers it sacred enough not to punch each other over spilled wine. Dionysus watches it all from the wings, half smiling. See? All they needed was a stage to admit they have feelings. You're helping backstage again, holding a satyr mask that still smells like pine resin and ambition. You've learned to walk in soft silence, to avoid stepping on monologues or interrupting choral crescendos. But tonight feels different. The actors seem nervous. The playwright is pacing. Even the goats look unsettled. Because tonight's play is about Dionysus. And he didn't write it. Mainstream fact of the night, one of the most famous plays featuring Dionysus is the Bacchae, written by Euripides. It tells the story of a king, Pentheus, who refuses to acknowledge Dionysus as a god. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for him. We're talking divine vengeance, dismemberment, and a heavy metaphor about what happens when you suppress the wild side of humanity. In this performance, the actor playing Dionysus is tall, smug, and dangerously convincing. When he steps on stage, there's an audible hush. People shift in their seats. You glance at the real Dionysus, hidden under a hood in the back row. He's watching, lips parted, expression unreadable. On stage, the play unfolds like a trap. Pentheus mocks the idea of gods that drink and dance. He orders the arrest of Dionysus. He calls the revelers mad women. The audience squirms, torn between amusement and dread. The actor Dionysus lures Pentheus into disguise, convinces him to dress as a woman to spy on the Bacchae, Dionysus's frenzied female followers. And then, in the mountains, Pentheus meets his end. You can almost hear the crowd stop breathing as the scene turns. Pentheus is ripped apart, not by soldiers, but by his own mother, lost in divine madness. Fringe historical tidbit. Some believe the Bacchae was Euripides' way of criticizing Athens' growing rationalism. He'd gone into exile by the time it was performed, and he died shortly after writing it. Historians still argue whether the play is a warning, a celebration, or a cynical goodbye. After the final scream echoes through the stone seats, there's a long pause. Then applause. Then silence again. Dionysus doesn't clap. He turns to you. I've never felt so fictional. You're not sure how to respond, so you just sit with him until the stars fade. Later that night, after most of the crowd has shuffled home, some crying, some loudly debating who really deserved what, you and Dionysus walk through the city. He's uncharacteristically quiet. Did it bother you? You ask finally. No, he says. It thrilled me. He grins, teeth flashing. They've stopped worshipping and started questioning. That's when real belief begins. You pass a group of teenagers reenacting a scene in the street. One shouts, "I am the god of wine and terror," before collapsing in a dramatic heap. The others laugh. Dionysus chuckles. See? Theater is contagious. And just like that, the idea spreads. Other cities want their own versions of this magic. Messengers leave Athens with scrolls and masks, eager to build amphitheaters in their own rocky hillsides. The format mutates as it moves, some add music, others subtract the chorus. One rogue group in Corinth insists on performing everything backward for symbolic reasons no one fully understands. Meanwhile, the city itself begins to shift. Philosophers start quoting plays in their lectures. Lawmakers reference stage tragedies when proposing reforms. One merchant opens a tavern called The Goat Song, complete with a nightly performance that may or may not involve interpretive dance with actual goats. The theater has become more than entertainment. It's become memory. Myth made visible. And Dionysus? He gets even bolder. He hosts secret midnight performances just for the misfits, freed slaves, wandering musicians, women whose voices have never echoed off marble. They perform under moonlight, faces painted with ash and wine. The stories they tell aren't heroic epics. They're about jealousy, hunger, tenderness, spite. The raw stuff. You remember one woman, her hands trembling as she recited a poem about losing her son in a war she never chose. No gods, no prophecies, just grief so thick it echoed. When she finished, no one clapped. They just sat together in the silence. Breathing. Dionysus whispered to you, that's theater too. Eventually, the city's elite catch wind of these gatherings. One aristocrat tries to crash the performance in golden sandals and scented robes. Dionysus, in disguise, asks him to play a role. The man agrees, smug. He's cast as a tree. And not even a dramatic one. Just a background prop. The man stands there for hours while the rest of the cast weaves a story around him. He's humiliated, but afterward, he claims it was spiritually transformative. He becomes a patron of the arts. You and Dionysus laugh about it for days. Humility, he says, is the first step toward real creativity. But there's a shadow creeping along the edge of all this brilliance. Some say the plays are getting too political. Too powerful. That the wrong kind of truth, spoken loud enough, can unmake a city faster than any army. Censors are discussed. Laws proposed. Philosophers argue over the morality of theater. One writes an entire treatise suggesting that actors are dangerous because they pretend too well. That empathy, when unchecked, leads to chaos. Dionysus raises an eyebrow. So, empathy is bad now? He starts writing again. Not plays, exactly, just notes. Sketches. Scribbled fragments of ideas meant to provoke. One simply reads, "What if the gods needed therapy more than humans?" You tell him that's risky. He just winks. Risk, he says, is where the art lives. And then, For the first time in a while, he asks you something. Do you think they're ready for me to disappear again? You hesitate. Because, honestly, you're not sure. He pats your shoulder. That's a yes. And just like that, he vanishes. No farewell. No wine-soaked goodbye. Just gone. But the theater doesn't stop. The next morning, a new play is announced. Written anonymously. The title? The One Who Left Before the Curtain Fell. You smile. Because you recognize the handwriting. The script spreads before you like a half-forgotten dream. The One Who Left Before the Curtain Fell becomes a local obsession. No one admits to writing it, yet everyone swears they saw their own story buried in its lines. Old bakers weep during monologues. Young soldiers fidget in silence. Even the critics, always smug behind their waxed beards, are stunned into brief, blessed humility. The play is strange, fragmented, non-linear, and full of questions it refuses to answer. It opens with a character who claims to be a god, but insists he no longer wants to be worshipped. He wanders through half-built cities, offering theater to lonely people like a traveling peddler offering shoes that never quite fit. You sit near the back during opening night, heart fluttering, because you know who wrote this. Dionysus is gone, sure, but this? This is him. These are his footprints, muddy and wine-stained, wandering through the script. The way the god character stares into the audience and says, "What if the mask isn't to hide, but to hold us together?" That's Dionysus down to the vine-wrapped bones. Mainstream fact for tonight: many scholars agree that Athenian theater played a crucial role in shaping democratic thought. It was one of the few spaces where the city came together, rich and poor, soldier and sailor, slave and citizen, to hear the same story. The chorus even spoke for the people. It was a civic ritual disguised as entertainment. Fringe detail? There's a rumor, unconfirmed, unproven, and absolutely irresistible, that the anonymous playwriting trend began because of Dionysus himself. Supposedly, he challenged his followers to create without ego. No author names. No applause lines. Just the work, bare and wild, like him. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine movement or just a playful prank that got out of hand. Either way, it stuck. And the effect? It changes something in you. Without Dionysus physically there, his presence becomes quieter. Deeper. Not in the booming way of thunder or divine fire, but like wine left in the cellar too long, stronger, more mysterious. You begin to notice him in places you wouldn't have before. In the break of a voice on stage. In the soft weep of a flute. In the wild laughter echoing across a marketplace at dusk. You begin to understand, the theater isn't his invention. It is him. And now, it's yours, too. You're no longer just the one painting masks or running lines backstage. Slowly, shyly, you begin writing. Just fragments, at first. A monologue from a stonemason who talks to birds. A scene where a god disguises himself as a shoe merchant and accidentally causes an economic crisis. You leave them in public squares, folded into benches, slipped beneath amphorae at the agora. People read them. Perform them. Cry and laugh and argue over them. And no one knows it's you. One morning, you find a scroll on your doorstep. It's unsigned, just like yours. The title? The One Who Stayed After the Curtain Closed. You grin. You've got competition now. The culture around theater evolves. Fast. There are now underground troupes performing flash dramas in alleyways. Rich patrons sponsor masked actors to perform at their parties. Children play chorus in the streets, repeating the refrains of tragedies like nursery rhymes. One chorus goes, "Cry for the king who laughed too loud. He wore the mask, then dropped the crown." Even the temples start borrowing stagecraft. Priests use costumes to make myths more compelling. There's one priest who pretends to be Poseidon every summer solstice, complete with a fake beard made of seaweed and a trident carved from driftwood. Pilgrims come from miles away. Dionysus would have howled. You find your way to Delphi, chasing rumors of a new kind of oracle, one who delivers prophecies in verse, on stage, with lighting cues. She's good. Eerily good. You ask her if Dionysus has visited lately. She smiles, paints a circle in the air with incense smoke, and whispers, he never left. You travel farther. Corinth. Thebes. Even Spartan outskirts, where drama is officially frowned upon but still secretly performed under the name combat training. Everywhere you go, theater is thriving. Twisting into new shapes. Stretching its limbs. Some call it the Dionysian legacy. Others call it public danger dressed in costume. One city council bans satire after a play portrays its mayor as a lovesick donkey. The ban lasts 3 weeks, until the next festival, when a masked actor sneezes too loudly during a drama and accidentally reintroduces comedy with an impromptu fart joke. You're writing more now. Whole scripts. You give them away. Sometimes they're performed seriously. Other times they're ridiculed. Once, an actor forgot every line and improvised the entire show as a surrealist mime experience. It bombed. Then it went viral. You learned something that night. You don't control what the story becomes. You only birth it. And then one summer evening, in a village you barely remember traveling to, you see him again. Dionysus. Sitting on a low wall, eating olives from a wooden bowl like it's the most obvious thing in the world. He's dressed plainly. No crown, no staff. Just tired sandals and that eternal glint of mischief. You wrote The One Who Stayed, didn't you? You ask. He shrugs. I might have whispered it in someone's ear. You sit beside him. The air is warm, thick with the scent of figs and wood smoke. You disappeared. I wanted to see if it would work without me. And? He smiles. It's better. There's a long silence between you, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. Just the rustle of trees. The soft thrum of music in the distance. Finally, Dionysus says, you're not just part of the story anymore. You look at him. You're telling it. And then, like smoke or laughter, he's gone again. No flash. No exit music. Just you. The dusk. And a stage waiting to be filled. You stand on a cracked stone path that leads nowhere in particular, staring at the horizon like it's the opening scene of a play you haven't memorized yet. Your satchel is stuffed with scrolls, your own scripts, other people's fragments, some so smudged with wine stains and dirt that you wonder if they're cursed or just loved too hard. Behind you, the amphitheater glows with torchlight. Another performance is starting. You could stay. You could watch. But something in your bones hums, something Dionysus once called itchy soul feet. So you walk. Your destination is Eleuthery, a dusty border town not famous for much, unless you count the fact that it's supposedly where Dionysus first wandered into Attica, dragging his plays and his chaos behind him. You've heard rumors. That the locals have built a tiny, crumbling theater. That they perform nightly, even if no one shows up. That once a year, a figure shows up with a mask of ivy leaves and performs in silence for 3 hours straight. Mainstream fact of the evening, Eleuthery is indeed associated with Dionysus's mythological arrival in Athens. In fact, its citizens are credited with introducing his cult to the Athenian state. Some even say the city's refusal to welcome Dionysus led to a plague, until they finally gave in and built him a temple. Fringe tidbit. There's an old myth that Dionysus, rejected by the proud Athenian elite, carried a wooden statue of himself to the city gates, and that the statue laughed. Loudly. And then it cried. This emotional little plank of wood was later worshipped, kissed by priests, and dressed in robes. Historians still argue whether the statue even existed, or if it was just Dionysus being Dionysus and pretending a chunk of cedar was sentient to prove a point. You arrive at Eleuthery as dusk folds over the hills like an old blanket. The town smells of damp hay, hot bread, and sheep that don't understand stage etiquette. A skinny boy with paint-smeared hands runs past you, shouting something about costumes. A woman holding a worn script in one hand and a goat leash in the other nods in greeting. You nod back. They're rehearsing. The theater is barely a theater, more a lopsided circle of stones with a platform nailed together from scrap wood and wishful thinking. The backdrop is a stitched tapestry of clouds and lightning bolts. The chorus? 5 teens in matching tunics, chewing olives and arguing over whether their god voices sound epic enough. It's perfect. You take a seat on a rock. No one asks who you are. No one stops to question if you belong. Tonight's play is something called The Crying Mask, and it's about a merchant who loses his voice and accidentally becomes a silent prophet. It's messy. There are costume malfunctions. Someone drops a prop dagger and it rolls off stage. But at one point, the merchant raises his hands to the sky, and the chorus whispers in unison, even silence performs. And it hits you like a splash of cold amphora water. This is what Dionysus wanted. Not grandeur. Not temples. Not even perfect scripts. Just humans, messy, aching, ridiculous humans, making stories out of their own chaos. You stay a week. You help with paint, lighting, which means adjusting torch angles, and rewriting lines when someone forgets theirs. You even perform one night, playing a talking bush that tries to convince a soldier to abandon war and take up gardening. You get heckled by a goat, which seems fitting. Each night, the audience grows. First, it's just the townsfolk. Then merchants passing through. Then travelers who heard whispers about the tiny town that makes magic. One night, a man arrives in a hooded cloak. He sits at the back. Doesn't speak. Doesn't move. But you feel him watching. After the final applause, he leaves a note on the edge of the stage. This was better than anything I wrote. Keep going. No signature. But the ink smells faintly of myrrh and mischief. You smile for a full day. Eventually, the time comes to move on again. The road calls. The story stretches. You pack your satchel, now heavier with new scripts and gifted tokens, an olive wood flute, a goat hair bracelet, a drawing of you as the talking bush with very questionable proportions. You walk south this time. On the way, you meet a caravan of traveling performers, Athenians pretending to be Thebans, pretending to be Spartans, pretending to be gods. It's gloriously confusing. They invite you to join, and you do, for a while. The troupe becomes your new family. You share stories, write scripts together, even perform a drama called The Vine That Grew Through Stone, which involves 20 meters of green fabric and a surprise mid-scene wine tasting. Everywhere you go, people are hungry for stories. Not just the old myths, but new ones. Local ones. Real ones. A widow telling the tale of her lost husband with humor sharp enough to sting. A shepherd who's convinced his sheep are reincarnated heroes and stages nightly epics for them. A child who writes a tragedy about a clay pot that shatters because it falls in love with a fire. People cry. People laugh. Sometimes in the same breath. You learn that laughter and tragedy aren't opposites. They're siblings. And Dionysus is their slightly drunk uncle who insists on hosting every family reunion. Historians, you remember, still argue whether theater was ever meant to be sacred or whether it just became that because humans can't help but turn shared experience into worship. Maybe it's both. Maybe every time a crowd leans forward to listen, a little altar lights up somewhere. One night, around a fire, someone asks you if you believe in Dionysus. You don't answer right away. Instead, you pick up a piece of charcoal and begin sketching a mask in the dirt. One half smiling. One half weeping. When you finish, you look up and say, "I think he believes in us." And for a moment, the fire flickers green. Your feet take you to Athens again, though you hadn't exactly planned it. Like a coin tossed into a fountain, you just keep finding your way back. The city buzzes louder than before, swollen with new voices, new ideas, and the kind of creative chaos that makes sleep impossible unless it's earned in exhaustion. You hear whispers before you see it, a new theater. Bigger. Bolder. Stone-seating tiers carved straight into the slope below the Acropolis. It gleams with promise in the midday sun, and even though construction isn't finished, people are already sitting in the half-formed audience space, rehearsing lines to no one but the wind. This is the theater of Dionysus. Or at least the bones of it. The very one historians later say would host Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, though none of them have quite arrived yet. Right now, it's just a hope sculpted from scaffolding and ambition. Mainstream historical fact, the theater of Dionysus in Athens is widely considered the birthplace of Western theater. Built in the 6th century BCE and later expanded, it was a focal point of the city Dionysia, a spring festival honoring Dionysus with drama competitions that attracted the best playwrights of the era. Fringe tidbit: there's a lesser-known tale that the very first competition held here was judged not by noblemen or priests, but by a group of randomly chosen olive farmers. They supposedly picked the winner because he gave free wine during intermission. Historians still argue whether this is just an exaggerated metaphor for democracy or an actual example of divine trolling. You sit on the rough-hewn stone and listen to a ragged chorus of young performers. They're arguing about masks, whether to go traditional or try something more avant-garde, which currently means turning tragedy masks upside down to make them look perpetually confused. One of them wears a tunic made entirely of stitched-together grape leaves and introduces himself as the Vine Oracle. Another keeps forgetting his lines but makes up for it with high kicks. You offer to help tighten the mask's fit and somehow get roped into being their unofficial director. The play is Orpheus after the song, a strange sequel where Orpheus climbs out of the underworld, only to discover he left pieces of himself behind with every verse he sang. It's moody, ambitious, and a little too long. Perfect. As rehearsals continue, the festival planners finally announce the first official Dionysia performance schedule. 3 days of plays. 1 for tragedy. 1 for comedy. And 1, oddly enough, just called experimentals. You're offered a slot in experimentals. No pressure, just the largest crowd Athens has ever gathered for theater and the future of Dionysian drama hanging in the balance. You say yes, obviously. You stay up for 2 nights straight writing something that doesn't even have a title yet. It starts with a woman who bakes bread that sings lullabies. By the second act, the bread unionizes and runs for political office. By the end, no one remembers whether it was comedy or tragedy. You decide it's breadcore. Opening day comes. You can feel the city breathing in unison as crowds funnel toward the amphitheater. They wear cloaks of deep blue and gold. Children carry ivy wreaths. The smell of grilled fish, incense, and sweaty anticipation hangs thick in the air. Some people camped out overnight just to sit close. You peek through a stage curtain made of borrowed sheets. The audience stretches out like a sea of masks, each one reflecting torchlight in little flickers. The world feels big. Bigger than anything you've ever touched. And then, right before the performance starts, someone sneezes backstage. Loudly. Everyone freezes. A long beat of silence follows. And then, laughter. Roaring, warm, human laughter, spreading through the backstage crew like wildfire. The play begins. It's messy. Electric. One of the mask strings snaps mid-monologue and a chorus member improvises a cover line so sharp that someone in the front row spits wine laughing. The bread characters are a hit. The Vine Oracle makes a surprise cameo and delivers a line about yeast being the soul's fermentation that gets quoted for weeks. You don't remember the whole show clearly. You're floating the entire time, every nerve tuned to audience breath, every heartbeat echoing your own. But you remember the ending. The final line. Even crumbs can feed a future. And then silence. Followed by the loudest applause you've ever heard. It echoes off the stone and into the sky. Afterwards, you sneak away from the celebrations. You don't need the praise. What you need is a quiet street, a moment to breathe. That's when you see him again. Dionysus. Leaning casually against a column, picking olives from a pouch like he's watching his favorite sitcom rerun. Well, he says. You raise an eyebrow. You saw? He pops an olive into his mouth. I saw the bread union. That was risky. Ballsy. Delicious. You sit beside him. For once, you're not nervous around him. You're equals now, in some strange, myth-bent way. I didn't know if it would work, you admit. Of course you didn't, he replies. That's why it did. The sun rises over Athens. The city is hungover on theater. People will wake with ivy stuck to their robes, lines of poetry tattooed on their memories. The gods, if they watched, are surely grinning. Dionysus stands. You've done well, he says. But it's just Act 1. You nod. And then, just like before, he vanishes, not with a clap of thunder or a flare of divine fire, but in the blink of a heartbeat. You'd think you imagined him, if not for the olive pit he left on the ground beside you. You pick it up. Tuck it into your satchel. Along with scripts, sketches, and one terribly misspelled fan letter from a child who thinks your name is Mr. Breadlord. You laugh. You walk. You wonder what Act 2 will look like. Theater lives now. Not in temples. Not even in the amphitheater. It lives in you. You wake to a city humming with buzzwords, democracy, citizenry, polis, but none of them quite feel real yet. Athens is still figuring itself out, much like you, perched on the edge of theater's first great revolution. You find yourself in a dusty marketplace, where rhetoric is the currency, and everyone's trying to sell you a version of truth wrapped in golden speeches. But you're chasing a different kind of truth. One stitched together by masks, music, and moments of shared silence. You cross paths with a scholar whose obsession is the ancient dithyramb, those wild choral hymns to Dionysus that predate the scripted plays you now love. They tell you that the dithyramb was the seedbed of tragedy, that its chaos was both a spiritual frenzy and a social safety valve. They also mention that historians still argue whether the dithyramb's improvisational roots were lost too quickly as drama became more civilized, or if that wildness secretly survives in the subtext of every great tragedy. Quirky tidbit? There's an odd belief that some dithyrambs were performed by goat men called satyrs, whose wild dancing might have caused the earliest flash mobs. These satyrs wore goat skins, howled, and maybe even accidentally scared some city officials into passing stricter noise ordinances. Still, their role as the original party starters of theater is undeniable. You find a quiet spot near the agora, the city's bustling heart, and jot down notes for a new play. This one's about a chorus of satyrs who accidentally start a political revolution by singing out of tune at the wrong moment. It's absurd, but also strangely poignant. Nearby, a philosopher debates loudly about whether art imitates life or life imitates art, a question that feels as endless as the sky. You wonder if Dionysus would laugh at their debate or pour them a glass of wine and suggest a dance-off instead. Your days are filled with rehearsals, discussions, and stolen moments watching the city breathe beneath a sky that seems wider than your imagination. You glimpse actors perfecting their tragic stares and comedians practicing slapstick that still feels fresh. And you realize theater isn't just an escape, it's a mirror, a spotlight, and sometimes, a gentle shove toward understanding the messy, beautiful human condition. You feel Dionysus's presence not as a god in the sky, but in the pulse of the crowd, in the rustle of the masks, and in your own restless creativity. The play you're working on grows roots here in the city that's learning to listen to its own story. And so, the next act begins. You wander through the twisting streets of Athens, the air thick with the scent of olives, fresh bread, and the occasional whiff of burnt offerings. The city is alive with anticipation. The city Dionysia festival is just around the corner. Everywhere, you hear rehearsals, loud debates about tragic heroes, and the faint clinking of wine cups. This festival, you learn, is the big deal, the place where playwrights like Aeschylus will soon battle for glory, and where theater will truly come into its own. Mainstream fact: the city Dionysia was a state-sponsored festival held annually in Athens, attracting playwrights who competed with tragic trilogies and satyr plays, judged by prominent citizens. It was part religious ceremony, part artistic showcase, and part social event, a real must-attend of the ancient calendar. Fringe tidbit: some scholars suggest that the earliest city Dionysia included a peculiar ritual involving a giant phallic procession, complete with dancers wearing enormous, comically exaggerated masks, a tradition that supposedly evolved into the chorus's iconic mask usage. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic fertility worship or just a very elaborate party prank. You decide to attend a secret rehearsal led by a grizzled playwright who swears he once debated with Socrates over the proper use of irony. His play, called The Wrath of the Earth, is a story of gods and mortals entangled in a stubborn feud that echoes the political tensions bubbling beneath the city's polished exterior. As you watch, you notice the chorus moving rhythmically, their chants blending seamlessly with the clatter of wooden sandals and the low murmur of the audience's restless breaths. The masks they wear, exaggerated and haunting, transform their faces into something both familiar and strange. You wonder about the power of these masks, how they allow one person to become many, to tell stories that transcend time and place. Later, you mingle with the festival goers, merchants, politicians, peasants, and performers, each bringing their own perspective on the meaning behind the plays. Some say theater is a tool for social control, others believe it's a sacred communion with the divine, and a few just want to see someone fall off the stage. You listen, laugh, and take it all in, realizing that theater is more than just entertainment, it's a living conversation, constantly evolving with every whispered line and spontaneous laugh. That night, as the stars spill over the city like scattered wine, you dream of masks dancing beneath olive trees, of stories carried on the wind, and of Dionysus smiling quietly somewhere in the shadows. You wake to the distant sound of flutes and laughter winding through the olive groves, a gentle reminder that the world is never quite as orderly as you want it to be. The festival is in full swing, and the streets of Athens pulse with energy. Merchants hawk sweet figs and honey cakes, citizens exchange news, gossip, and bold political opinions that echo off the marble temples. The whole city feels like a stage set for something grand and unpredictable. You make your way toward the theater of Dionysus, where a crowd has gathered to witness a new play. The air is thick with dust and anticipation, and the scent of crushed grapes from last night's revelry still lingers. A chorus of masked performers moves rhythmically, their voices rising and falling like waves, telling a story both ancient and new. Mainstream fact: the chorus in Greek tragedy was not just background, it was a crucial storyteller, sometimes narrating, sometimes commenting, often embodying the collective voice of society or nature itself. Their movements and songs were carefully choreographed, a blend of dance, music, and speech. Quirky tidbit: some ancient playwrights reportedly employed live animals on stage, goats, birds, even snakes, to symbolize Dionysus's wild nature, though historians still argue whether this was common practice or just isolated incidents exaggerated over time. You find yourself drawn into the rhythm, the rising and falling cadence hypnotic and oddly soothing. The story being told is one of loss and redemption, of a city wrestling with change and the gods who watch but seldom intervene. The tension builds, not with bloodshed or thunder, but through whispered doubts and quiet heartbreaks. In the moments between scenes, you overhear a conversation about whether theater's primary purpose is to teach, to entertain, or to commune with the divine. Opinions vary wildly. Some see the stage as a mirror reflecting society's flaws, others believe it's a temple where humans can glimpse eternity. Historians still argue which interpretation came first, or if they've always been intertwined. You watch as a young actress removes her mask during a break, revealing a flushed face and a nervous smile. You realize that beneath every god or monster lies a person, vulnerable and alive, carrying their own story behind the painted visage. The sun dips low, casting long shadows over the ancient stones. As the final scene unfolds, the chorus's voices soften, blending with the evening breeze. You close your eyes and feel the weight of history, myth, and human longing all wrapped into this moment. And somewhere deep inside, you sense Dionysus's laughter, the sound of chaos and creation, mingling like wine and water. The morning sun peeks through your window, but your mind is still wrapped in last night's chorus, that echo of voices and shadows that feels more like a dream than memory. You wander through the city, now quieter in the early light, but the buzz of ideas is already stirring again. Athens is a city caught between tradition and transformation, and you can almost taste the tension on the air like sour wine. You stumble upon a group of philosophers debating fiercely under the shade of an olive tree. Their voices rise and fall, punctuated by gestures as they argue about the nature of tragedy itself, whether it should serve to purge emotions through catharsis, as Aristotle later wrote, or if it's simply an elaborate way to scare audiences into behaving better. Historians still argue whether this idea of catharsis was a formal part of early Greek drama or a later interpretation by scholars trying to make sense of the art. Quirky tidbit: there's a peculiar story about a certain philosopher who once attended a tragic play, only to fall asleep during the climactic scene. When he woke, he reportedly claimed the whole tragedy was just a confusing dream, much to the chagrin of the playwright, who swore revenge in his next script. You find yourself drawn into the conversation, realizing how theater is not just a performance but a battleground of ideas, where gods, heroes, and mortals collide not just on stage but in the minds of the audience. Nearby, an actor rehearses a monologue that seems to blend grief and hope, his voice trembling with every word. You note how the use of masks, while hiding faces, actually allows performers to amplify emotions, turning the personal into the universal. As you walk through the agora, the city's marketplace, you overhear a merchant selling small masks as souvenirs. He jokes that owning one brings a bit of Dionysus's magic, though most buyers probably just want a cool decoration. The day fades into evening, and you find a quiet spot overlooking the city. The Acropolis stands silhouetted against the fading light, a reminder that stories, like stone, endure. You feel, more than ever, that theater is a living thing, wild, unpredictable, and utterly human. And somewhere, you swear you hear Dionysus chuckling softly on the wind. The city awakens slowly beneath a sky painted in soft pinks and purples, the warm light filtering through olive branches and ancient columns. You wander toward the harbor, where ships bob gently, their sails slack in the morning breeze. The sea smells of salt and promise, a reminder that Athens's reach extends far beyond its walls, into distant lands, stories, and ideas. You find yourself drawn to a small group of sailors and merchants gathered near crates of exotic spices and fabrics. They speak of tales from the farthest corners of the Mediterranean, stories that ripple out like waves, carrying whispers of gods, monsters, and strange customs that seem both familiar and utterly alien. These tales, you realize, have influenced the myths you know, twisting and turning like vines in a garden. Historical fact: trade and travel were essential to the spread of myths in the ancient world. Greek myths often absorbed elements from Egyptian, Phoenician, and Near Eastern stories, blending local traditions with new ideas to create the rich tapestry of legend we study today. Quirky tidbit: some merchants claim that the god Dionysus himself once sailed the seas disguised as a humble trader, spreading wine and theater wherever he went. Whether this is myth or marketing is a matter for historians to debate. You listen to a merchant recount the tale of a sea god who falls in love with a mortal woman, only to be thwarted by jealous gods and capricious fate. The story sounds familiar but different, a cousin to the stories of Orpheus and Eurydice, yet tinged with salt and wind. Inspired, you sketch ideas for a new play, a seafaring tragedy with masked sailors who sing to calm the storms, blending the chaos of the sea with the order of the chorus. You imagine the sound of waves crashing against stone, the creak of ropes, and the distant call of seabirds mingling with the actors' voices. Nearby, a child chases pigeons while clutching a tiny amphora painted with Dionysian scenes. You smile, realizing that theater and myth are as much about the future as the past, stories passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, growing like ivy. As the sun climbs higher, you feel the pull of the city's heartbeat, the rhythms of commerce, worship, and creation all tangled together like threads in a loom. And somewhere beneath the laughter and song, you catch the faintest hint of Dionysus's laughter, a sound that is at once wild, tender, and infinitely alive. You find yourself back in the thick of Athens' bustling streets, where every corner seems to whisper secrets of gods and mortals alike. Today, your path leads you to the theater of Dionysus once more, but this time the stage is set for something different, the satyr play, that curious hybrid offspring of tragedy and comedy. Historians still argue whether satyr plays were a clever release valve for the audience's tension after a trilogy of heavy tragedies, or if they were more than that, a form of ritualistic mischief meant to honor Dionysus's unpredictable spirit. Either way, you're about to witness their strange, bawdy charm firsthand. Mainstream fact: satyr plays featured choruses of satyrs, half-man, half-goat creatures, who engaged in crude humor, dance, and slapstick, often mocking the very gods and heroes celebrated in the tragedies. They were short, raucous, and essential to the festival's balance. Quirky tidbit: some ancient manuscripts suggest that the actors playing satyrs were required to grow actual goat beards or wear specially crafted costumes that smelled faintly of goat, an olfactory reminder that Dionysus's domain was as much about sensory overload as sacred ritual. You settle in among the crowd as the satyrs burst onto the stage, their energy contagious. They leap, howl, and cavort, poking fun at everything from heroic hubris to the city's own politicians. It's both ridiculous and oddly liberating, a reminder that even in a culture obsessed with order and decorum, chaos has its place. You catch yourself laughing louder than you expected, the sound mixing with the chorus's chants and the slapstick antics unfolding before you. The play feels like a breath of fresh, wine-scented air, a wild dance in the garden of human folly. Behind the masks, you glimpse flashes of the actors' personalities, quick wit, nimble bodies, and eyes sparkling with mischief. It's as if the spirit of Dionysus flows through them, uniting audience and performer in a shared moment of joyous rebellion. As the sun sets and the laughter fades, you feel a deep sense of connection, not just to the play or the festival, but to a tradition that embraces complexity, contradiction, and above all, the unpredictable rhythms of life. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the city, you imagine Dionysus raising his cup in a silent toast to the wild, wonderful world of theater. The early evening brings a strange calm over Athens, a lull between the frenzy of the festival and the quiet of night. You drift through the dimming streets, the scent of pine and roasted lamb mingling with the faint smoke of altar fires. The city feels suspended in time, a place where gods and mortals brush shoulders without quite noticing. You find yourself drawn to the outskirts, near the foot of the Acropolis, where a small group gathers for an informal storytelling session under the stars. The speaker, an older woman with eyes that seem to hold centuries, recounts tales of Dionysus not as a god, but as a mortal wanderer, someone who brought theater to the people to cure his own boredom and loneliness. This idea tickles your mind. Could it be that theater wasn't just divine command but a human invention born from the restless desire to fill quiet moments, to connect, to escape the dullness that sometimes creeps into even the busiest lives? Historians still argue whether Dionysus was a god first or a symbol of human creativity later adopted by religion. Quirky tidbit: Some fringe theories suggest that early theatrical performances were literally invented to stave off boredom during long wine-fueled nights, with drunken improvisations gradually evolving into structured plays. So basically, the first theater critics might have been tipsy and brutally honest. You watch as the storyteller's voice rises and falls, her hands painting pictures in the firelight. Around her, listeners lean in, some skeptical, others enchanted. You think about how stories have always been a balm for the restless mind, a way to weave meaning out of chaos. Nearby, a group of young actors rehearse quietly, their voices blending with the crackling fire and the distant hum of the city. They laugh softly, sharing mistakes and triumphs, their camaraderie a living testament to the spirit of Dionysus's gift. The stars will overhead as you settle onto the cool stone, letting the tales and the night wash over you. Somewhere in the distance, a flute begins to play, a haunting melody that seems to carry both sorrow and hope. You realize that theater is not just about gods or heroes, but about people, their boredom, their laughter, their dreams. And in this quiet moment, you feel Dionysus not as a distant deity, but as a companion on your own journey through the wild landscape of stories. Dawn breaks with a soft glow, and you find yourself wandering back toward the agora, where the city's heart beats loudest. Traders unpack their goods, philosophers argue over breakfast olives, and children chase one another through the stone columns. But today, your focus is drawn to the subtle rhythm of words, the poetry and prose that shape not only theater but the very soul of Athens. You overhear a young playwright pitching his newest idea, a play about a mortal cursed by the gods, whose fate is sealed not by violence but by the slow unraveling of his reputation. The crowd listens intently, some nodding, others frowning. It's a story about shame, pride, and the fragile line between heroism and folly. Mainstream fact, this theme of tragic downfall, or hamartia, became central to Greek tragedy, exploring the flaws in human character that lead to suffering and often death. It's a literary concept that has echoed through centuries of storytelling. Quirky tidbit: there's a rumor that one of the earliest tragic heroes was modeled after a notorious Athenian politician who, after a scandal, was famously mocked on stage, an early example of drama as political commentary. Historians still debate how much early drama was used as veiled critique versus pure entertainment. You find a quiet corner and scribble notes, thinking about how theater is a mirror not just for gods but for ordinary people's struggles. The masks worn by actors strip away individuality to reveal universal truths, yet behind those masks, you sense the heartbeat of someone very human. Nearby, a chorus rehearses a haunting lament, their voices rising and falling like the sea against the rocks. You feel the weight of their song in your chest, an ache that is somehow comforting in its honesty. Later, a group discusses whether the playwright's art should aim to instruct the audience morally or simply reflect life's complexity without judgment. It's a debate that's as old as theater itself, with no clear answer. As the sun climbs higher, you realize that the stage is more than a platform, it's a space where Athens wrestles with its own identity, hopes, and fears. And through it all, Dionysus's mischievous grin seems to linger in the flicker of candlelight, reminding you that beneath every tragedy lies a hint of wild, unpredictable joy. The heat of midday presses down on you as you wander through a quieter part of Athens, where ivy crawls up worn stone walls and the scent of wild herbs hangs in the air. You stumble upon a small gathering outside a modest house, where a group of performers prepares for a private recital, a far cry from the grand amphitheater, but no less magical. The host, a wealthy patron of the arts, believes that theater should reach beyond the festival crowds and touch everyday life. You watch as actors slip in and out of masks, rehearsing scenes that mix myth and humor, tragedy and farce, a delicate balance that keeps the spirit of Dionysus alive. Mainstream fact, private performances were common in ancient Greece, often held in homes or small venues, making theater accessible beyond public festivals and allowing more experimental works to flourish. Quirky tidbit: some wealthy patrons supposedly kept entire troupes on retainer, demanding nightly performances that included improvisation, leading to moments of both brilliance and utter chaos. Historians still argue how much improvisation influenced scripted drama. You note how the intimacy of this setting changes everything, the actors' expressions visible beneath the masks, the audience's laughter and gasps more immediate and raw. It's theater stripped to its bones, a living, breathing dialogue between storyteller and listener. A performer recounts how Dionysus is often portrayed not just as a god of wine and madness but as a symbol of transformation, a force that breaks down boundaries and reshapes identities. This resonates deeply as you watch the fluid dance of characters shifting between roles, masks, and moods. As the afternoon wanes, you reflect on the power of theater to unite, a sacred chaos where order and disorder meet. The city outside hums with life, but here, in this quiet corner, the wild pulse of Dionysus beats steady and strong. And somewhere in the fading light, you imagine the gods' laughter mingling with the soft murmur of voices, an eternal reminder that theater, at its heart, is a celebration of life's unpredictable dance. As the sun dips lower, casting long golden shadows across the marble streets, you find yourself wandering toward the outskirts of the city, where the landscape softens into rolling hills dotted with vineyards and wildflowers. The scent of crushed grapes fills the air, an intoxicating reminder of Dionysus's presence, both god of wine and master of theater's wild spirit. You come upon a small, rustic amphitheater carved into the hillside, its seats worn smooth by countless audiences who've gathered here to watch stories unfold beneath the open sky. Tonight, a troupe prepares to perform a satyr play, a curious mix of raucous humor and mythic mischief designed to lighten the weight of tragedy. Historical fact: satyr plays were the final act in the dramatic trilogy performed during festivals, providing comic relief with their bawdy jokes and irreverent tone, a tradition that balanced the solemnity of the tragedies that preceded them. Quirky tidbit: some ancient accounts suggest that the actors playing satyrs wore costumes infused with goat hair and even carried real horns, an immersive approach meant to blur the line between human and beast. Historians still debate whether this was practical or purely symbolic. As you settle into the cool stone seats, the actors burst onto the stage, their movements exaggerated and wild. The chorus of satyrs chants, their voices a raucous blend of song and laughter, breaking the fourth wall with jabs at the audience and sly nods to the unpredictable nature of Dionysus himself. You laugh freely, caught up in the chaotic energy, feeling the tension of the day dissolve into the night. The play mocks gods and mortals alike, reminding you that even in a world ruled by divine forces, humor and irreverence hold power. Between scenes, you watch the actors' faces beneath their masks, eyes bright, smiles hidden but unmistakable. It's a reminder that beneath the wild facade lies a shared humanity, the same need to connect, to express, to revel in the absurd. As the final act closes, the crowd cheers, the night air alive with the echo of laughter and song. You rise, heart lighter, carried by the joyous spirit that Dionysus himself would envy. And somewhere in the stars overhead, you swear you hear his laughter, wild, free, and endlessly inviting. The night deepens, and the city quiets beneath a blanket of stars. You wander back through narrow lanes, the cobblestones cool beneath your feet, as the sounds of laughter and music fade into a distant hum. The festival of Dionysus lingers like a warm afterglow, but now your thoughts turn inward, to the mysteries woven into the very fabric of theater. You pause before a small shrine dedicated to Dionysus, its stone altar bathed in moonlight. The god's image is playful yet inscrutable, a reminder that his domain encompasses not just revelry but transformation, madness, and the thin line between order and chaos. Historians still argue whether the rituals surrounding Dionysus were more about ecstatic worship or social control, a way for communities to channel collective anxieties and desires through performance and celebration. Quirky tidbit: some scholars suggest that early theater audiences might have experienced altered states of consciousness, induced by wine, chanting, and rhythmic dancing, blurring the boundary between spectator and participant, basically, the ancient equivalent of a rave, but with togas. You think about how theater evolved from these primal roots, becoming a space where masks conceal and reveal, where stories mirror life's contradictions and the human psyche's depths. Dionysus, with his wild grin and unpredictable nature, embodies this perfect duality. Nearby, the soft murmur of a flute floats through the air, weaving a haunting melody that seems to speak directly to your soul. You imagine the first actors stepping onto a rough stage centuries ago, unsure whether their audience would laugh, cry, or simply walk away. In this moment, you feel connected across time, a part of a long tradition that embraces both the sacred and the absurd, the divine and the deeply human. And as you finally turn toward home, you carry with you the whispered promise that Dionysus's gift, the gift of theater, is alive, waiting for the next story to unfold. By morning, Athens is already humming again with life, as if the night's mysteries never happened. But something in you has shifted, your dreams still echo with masked faces and choruses chanting beneath the stars. You wake with a new curiosity, not just about the theater but about the god behind it all. What kind of deity invents something so strange and beautiful just because he's bored? You decide to visit a scholar known for collecting old scrolls and stranger opinions. His home is cluttered with statues, parchment, and the scent of ink and time. He welcomes you with a sleepy nod and offers you figs before launching into what he calls Dionysus's real biography. Mainstream historical fact: Dionysus's origin myth is unusually tangled. Some stories say he's the son of Zeus and the mortal Semele, others insist he was born twice, and still others claim he's older than Olympus itself, possibly adapted from older, non-Greek fertility deities. Quirky tidbit: one particularly bizarre myth claims Dionysus was born from Zeus's thigh after Semele was incinerated by divine glory, a concept that's equal parts weird and poetic. Some fringe thinkers even joke he's the only god ever born bored. The scholar leans in, voice low, and tells you his favorite version, that Dionysus wandered the world in human form not out of duty, but because immortality gets really dull. He missed the thrill of unpredictability, of not knowing the ending. So, he invented theater, not to teach, not even to entertain, but simply to feel something new. Historians still argue whether this interpretation is serious scholarship or clever nonsense. But as you sit there, nibbling a fig and watching dust dance in a sunbeam, it makes perfect sense. You remember the laughter, the gasps, the tears of the festival audience. You remember how even you, a simple traveler, were swept up in the emotion of it all. If you were a god, wouldn't you crave that too? As you leave the scholar's house, your head swimming with competing origin stories and half-true tales, you pass a child practicing lines for a school play. She stumbles on a phrase and laughs, unashamed, then tries again. And in that small moment, you see Dionysus not on a throne, but watching from a nearby rooftop, smiling, not because he's worshipped, but because he's still entertained. Later that day, you drift back toward the theater of Dionysus, now quiet again after the frenzy of the festival. The stone seats are warm from the sun, and the great stage lies empty, a space that somehow feels even more alive when no one is in it. You sit near the top row, letting the breeze tousle your hair and the silence soak into your skin. You start to notice the subtle details you missed before, the way the stage tilts just slightly to improve the audience's view, the carefully carved drainage channels to keep rain from pooling, the worn grooves from countless sandals pacing behind the skiing curtain. Mainstream fact: the architecture of the Greek theater was a marvel of both engineering and artistry. Its acoustics were so advanced that even whispers on stage could be heard clearly by thousands of spectators, thanks to its clever semicircular design and limestone construction. Quirky tidbit: some scholars believe that the masks worn by actors weren't just for anonymity, they may have worked like early megaphones, amplifying voices through open-mouthed designs. Historians still argue whether this effect was accidental or an ingenious feature of ancient costume making. You find yourself imagining a performance unfolding before you, the chorus entering in perfect rhythm, the tragic hero clutching his robes in anguish, the audience collectively holding its breath. Even in this stillness, the theater pulses with energy, like it remembers every story ever told here. A pair of tourists pass by, arguing whether Greek tragedy was supposed to be entertaining or educational. You smile, because you know by now the answer is both, and neither. The Greeks didn't draw hard lines between meaning and fun. They gave you Dionysus, a god of wild contradictions, and left the rest to interpretation. You close your eyes and picture a time when Athens was buzzing with anticipation for a new play. Where would the playwright take them? Would they laugh, cry, revolt, or fall silent? Every performance was a gamble, a gift, a shared act of belief that something old could feel new again. And as the sun begins to lower behind the Acropolis, you whisper a silent thanks to Dionysus, for inventing a world where boredom was not banished but transformed, one mask at a time. As twilight softens the edges of the city, you make your way toward a gathering near the temple precinct, an informal symposium hosted by poets, musicians, and philosophy students with more wine than direction. Pillows are strewn across the ground, lyres plucked lazily, and stories flow with the wine. The air is thick with frankincense and the hum of anticipation. Someone nudges you with a cup and says, "You know Dionysus didn't just invent theater, he made us the audience, too." A bold claim. But after a few sips of watered wine and the echo of laughter, it begins to make a strange kind of sense. Mainstream historical fact, in classical Athens, being an audience member was considered a civic duty. Citizens were even given stipends to attend performances, reinforcing theater's role as a collective, participatory experience rather than passive entertainment. Quirky tidbit: some attendees took their roles very seriously. There are records of arguments erupting in the stands, with fans passionately defending their favorite playwrights like modern sports fans, complete with jeers and snacks. Historians still argue whether these outbursts were staged or spontaneous. As you recline beside the flickering torchlight, a flute player begins a soft tune, and a young man stands to recite a monologue from memory. The crowd hushes. His voice cracks slightly, but the words flow like wine, a king facing fate, a plea to the gods, silence where a scream might have been. You look around and realize everyone is holding their breath. This moment belongs to them, to all of you. There are no special effects, no trapdoors or choreographed lighting. Just the spell of language, spun from one mind into many. And it strikes you, theater isn't merely the work of gods or geniuses. It's this: humans gathering in the dusk, hearts open, minds stirred, boredom cast off in favor of something shared, something strange and moving. The boy finishes. No applause, just a nod from the group, a refill of his cup. Life goes on. But something has shifted in the air, as if Dionysus himself has wandered briefly among them, pausing to listen, maybe even to smile. And in this haze of poetry, wine, and twilight wisdom, you remember, the god didn't just invent theater because he was bored. He did it because he believed you'd show up to watch. The night grows thicker, and stars pepper the sky like scattered seeds. You wander away from the symposium, step soft against the dusted earth, until the sound of music fades behind you. Ahead, torchlight flickers beside a hilltop shrine, a lesser-known sanctuary devoted to Dionysus in his most primal form, Dionysus Lysios, the Luciner. This version of the god, you've heard, doesn't care much for polished amphitheaters or clever metaphors. He's the god who breaks things open, minds, hearts, expectations. And some say this is the Dionysus who truly created theater, not to amuse, but to unravel. Mainstream fact: Dionysus Lysios was worshipped as a liberator, believed to free mortals from pain, constraint, and even the boundaries of identity. Rituals in his name were more ecstatic and disorienting than orderly, closer to group therapy with drums. Quirky tidbit: some remote rites dedicated to this aspect of Dionysus involved controlled madness, ritualized screaming, wild dancing, even temporary role reversals where slaves and masters swapped identities for the night. Historians still argue whether these acts were symbolic or socially destabilizing. You approach the shrine and sit at its base. It's a crude stone altar, no gold, no columns. Just weathered offerings, dried fruit, a goblet half full of something sweet, and a broken mask lying face up in the dust. You stare into its eye holes, and for a moment, you think you see your own reflection in the god's expression. It dawns on you that boredom isn't just the absence of activity. Sometimes it's the prison of identity, the same role, the same routine, day after day. And Dionysus? He smashed that. He gave mortals the chance to become someone else, even if just for an hour. A king, a god, a fool, a beast. And then to return to their lives changed, or at least momentarily loosened from their chains. You trace the edge of the broken mask with your fingers. Who are you right now? And who might you become, given a script and a stage? Above, the stars will slowly across the dark. And you whisper thanks, not just for the stories, but for the chance to step outside yourself, if only long enough to remember who you really are. You wake the next morning with dust in your hair and the faint taste of grapes on your tongue. There's no hangover, only a lingering softness in your bones, as if your dreams spilled out and draped themselves over your shoulders. You stretch and rise slowly, walking the path downhill from the shrine with the mask still tucked under your arm, as if it chose to follow you home. Back in the city, life resumes its usual tempo. Merchants shout their wares, sandals slap the pavement, and somewhere nearby, a chicken is arguing very loudly with gravity. And yet, you move through it all with the faintest sense that something beneath the world has changed shape, like the stage after a scene change, quiet but charged. You duck into a shaded portico, drawn by the scent of ink and beeswax. It's a scribe's shop, cluttered with scrolls and styluses, and the man behind the counter barely glances up before launching into a ramble about playwrights. Mainstream historical fact: the three most famous tragedians, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, each helped shape the art form differently. Aeschylus added a second actor, Sophocles a third and more complex dialogue, Euripides, well. Euripides gave tragedy a shot of emotional realism that made audiences uncomfortably reflective. Quirky tidbit: one of Euripides' plays, the Bacchae, is still debated for whether it's pro-Dionysus or a veiled warning about divine chaos. Some fringe theorists even claim he wrote it reluctantly, as a dare, or a trap. Historians still argue whether the Bacchae celebrates liberation or condemns it. You roll open a scroll and read a few lines aloud. The words are dry on the page, but you can already feel them vibrating with potential. This is the magic, isn't it? Theater isn't just performed, it's stored, carried, waited for. The scribe leans over and says, "You know, the gods used to send omens. Now they send scripts." You chuckle. It's probably a joke. Probably. As you leave the shop, you hear laughter from a nearby courtyard where children rehearse a crude retelling of a myth. A boy playing Zeus flubs his lines and turns red. The girl playing Hera smirks and ad-libs a lightning bolt made from a stick. And you realize, this is theater, too. It always was. It doesn't need marble stages or laurel wreaths. It just needs someone to pretend, someone to watch, and a god somewhere off stage, grinning like mad. As the sun begins its slow descent behind the city's stone edges, you find yourself meandering once more through the winding alleys of Athens, not aimlessly, but with a destination that's only beginning to form in your mind. Your feet, seemingly wiser than you, carry you toward the edge of the city, where the houses thin out and the olive trees reclaim the land. You're headed to a place few speak of directly, the cave said to be sacred to Dionysus, not as an actor, not as a god of wine or joy, but as the stranger. The wanderer. The one who arrives out of nowhere and upends everything you thought was stable. Mainstream historical fact: in many ancient Greek rituals, Dionysus was welcomed each year as a foreigner, an outsider who brought disruption and revelation. His cult was intentionally unsettling, a reminder that divinity might not always look like you expect. Quirky tidbit: in some versions of his myth, Dionysus wears women's clothing, travels with a posse of ecstatic dancers, and rides into towns on a leopard-drawn chariot. Historians still argue whether this gender-bending presentation was a metaphor for boundary breaking or a direct challenge to Athenian norms. You climb the narrow, crumbling path toward the cave, where ivy hangs like a curtain and the stone breathes cool air onto your flushed face. There's no shrine here, no altar. Just darkness, silence, and the faint trickle of water echoing off the stone walls. And yet, it feels more sacred than any temple. You sit at the mouth of the cave, your knees drawn up, the mask from the shrine still in your lap. You trace its cracks, wondering how many faces it has worn over time, how many names and emotions it has held. Inside this cave, you sense the raw material of theater, fear, mystery, the unknown. Before the scripts and stages and costumes, there was this, the human urge to face the darkness, to wrap it in story, and to say, here. Look. Feel this with me. The breeze shifts, and you swear you hear laughter, soft and distant, curling through the leaves. You smile. Because now you understand. Dionysus didn't invent theater to distract the bored. He gave it to you because the world is strange, and fragile, and sometimes you need to pretend to understand it, just long enough to survive it. You return to the city that night by lantern light, your steps slower now, as if you're reluctant to leave the edges where myth still clings to rocks and trees. Athens feels different than when you first arrived, less like a city and more like a stage between acts. You pass shadowy stoas, their columns glowing gold in the lamplight, and you imagine them as backstage corridors, waiting for the next entrance cue. Outside a modest home, a group of neighbors gathers around a small hearth, not to worship, not to feast, but to gossip. About the festival, about a new play, about the playwright who may or may not have stolen his final scene from an older, less talented cousin. You pause to listen, a fly on the wall in someone else's intermission. Mainstream historical fact, playwrights in ancient Athens weren't just artists, they were public figures. Winning a dramatic competition could launch your political career, and losing could tarnish your reputation permanently. Drama was serious business. Quirky tidbit? There are records of playwrights bribing chorus leaders, sabotaging props, or spreading rumors before festivals. One account even claims a playwright faked a divine vision just to justify a twist ending. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect the truth or just dramatic flair spun by later critics. You lean in closer, pretending to adjust your sandal as an older woman describes a performance so moving she claims she forgot where she was. I wept for a man I knew wasn't real, she says, shaking her head. Isn't that a kind of madness? Maybe it is. But as you glance around, at the flicker of firelight on faces, the way people lean in, hush, nod, you realize something more profound. Dionysus didn't just create plays. He created the conditions for catharsis, for that shared madness that purges something old to make room for something new. The old woman catches your eye. You were there, weren't you? At the festival? You nod. Well, she says, refilling your cup without asking, then you know. There's no going back after your first tragedy. And you do know. Not because you saw gods on stage or heroes crumble, but because, in the audience, you felt your own story crack open just enough to breathe. That night, as you lay under a quilt woven from faded colors and older dreams, your mind drifts back to the strange power of those plays, the way words could shatter silence and rebuild it with trembling hope. Your eyelids grow heavy, but a final thought tugs at you. Theater, like Dionysus himself, is a rebellion against the ordinary, a refusal to settle for boredom's quiet grip. Morning arrives quietly. You rise with the sun's first blush, stepping outside to a world both familiar and strange. Somewhere nearby, a cockerel crows, his call punctuating the stillness with a promise of day. You take a deep breath, savoring the scent of olive leaves warmed by the sun. You head to a quiet courtyard where an elderly woman is teaching children how to dance the sacred dithyramb, a choral hymn honoring Dionysus. The children's laughter is light and free, their feet tapping rhythms as old as the myths themselves. Mainstream historical fact, the dithyramb was the seed from which Greek tragedy grew, a spirited chorus song celebrating Dionysus's wild nature, originally performed by groups of up to 50 singers and dancers. Quirky tidbit: some scholars suggest that dithyrambs were less structured than formal plays, with spontaneous improvisations and audience participation, almost like ancient open mic nights. Historians still argue how much of the dithyramb was scripted versus entirely extemporaneous. You watch the children stumble and spin, their movements imperfect but joyful. It reminds you that theater, at its heart, is about participation, about stepping beyond yourself, even if just for a moment. Dionysus didn't want you to sit still and be bored. He wanted you to move, to feel, to get lost and found again in the rhythms of story and song. And as the sunlight deepens, you realize this isn't just ancient history. It's a living thing, breathing in the feet of these children, echoing in every clumsy dance step and every burst of laughter. You smile softly and settle into the shade, letting the music wash over you like a balm. The day passes like a slow, golden thread unraveling through the city's fabric. You wander again, eventually finding yourself near the agora, where merchants pitch their tents and philosophers debate in heated tones that echo between marble pillars. You hear the distant ring of a lyre and follow the sound to a small gathering where a man with a wild beard recounts tales of gods and mortals with a voice that rises and falls like the sea. He's reciting a fragment from an old satyr play, a genre you realize is like the Greek version of a comedy roast, mixing slapstick with biting commentary. Satyr plays poked fun at myths and gods alike, reminding audiences not to take the theater, or themselves, too seriously. Mainstream historical fact: satyr plays were a standard part of the tragic trilogy in ancient festivals, providing comic relief with lewd humor and choruses dressed as half-goat creatures. They balanced the heaviness of tragedy with irreverent laughter. Quirky tidbit: one satyr play reportedly featured a satyr mistaking a cloak for a snake and reacting in ways that had the entire audience in stitches. Historians still argue about how scripted these antics were versus being improvised by actors. As you listen, you're struck by how this mix of reverence and irreverence mirrors Dionysus himself, a god who embodies chaos and order, laughter and terror, seriousness and silliness all at once. The storyteller's eyes catch yours, and with a grin, he invites you to join in. For a moment, you consider it. To throw yourself into that wild energy, to shed the roles you carry daily and simply be part of the madness. You decline politely, but the invitation lingers. Because that's theater's magic, it breaks down the walls, invites you in, and dares you to forget boredom forever. And you think maybe that's exactly what Dionysus intended all along. Night falls again, but this time the city is quieter, its usual bustle replaced by a gentle hush. You find yourself wandering to the outskirts, where a small troupe is preparing for an impromptu performance under the stars. The stage is little more than a flat patch of earth, the backdrop a canvas of night sky dotted with stars. The actors, dressed in simple tunics, warm up with stretches and jokes, their energy infectious despite the late hour. One of them catches your eye and waves you over. You hesitate, then join the circle, feeling the subtle thrill of inclusion. Mainstream historical fact: many early Greek plays were performed outdoors, with audiences seated on grassy slopes or stone terraces, making the experience communal and immersive. Quirky tidbit: in some festivals, audience members were encouraged to shout suggestions or heckle performers, a practice historians still debate as either spontaneous or part of scripted interaction. The play begins, a comedic retelling of a myth where gods bungle their schemes and mortals outwit them. Laughter bubbles easily, and you realize how the performance isn't just about the story but about connection, about the shared human experience made tangible in the flickering torchlight. Between scenes, you chat with the actors, who confess that they perform not for glory but for the joy of it, for the moment when boredom slips away and something real takes its place. You lean back on the cool earth, watching shadows dance across faces, feeling for the first time the true heart of theater, not the spectacle or the script, but the spark ignited between people. And in that spark, you understand why Dionysus, bored himself, might have dreamed up this wild, wonderful madness, not just to escape dullness, but to bring everyone into the dance. The fire's glow softens, and the actors begin their final bow beneath the open sky, the murmurs of the audience blending with the chirping of crickets. You stay seated a while longer, absorbing the quiet that follows the laughter, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Your thoughts drift back to all the stories, faces, and masks you've encountered on this journey. The god who breaks boundaries, the playwrights who dared to challenge gods and kings, the children who dance with reckless joy, and the crowds who laughed, cried, and found themselves in the tales told. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Greek theater was as much a civic event as an artistic one, deeply woven into religious festivals like the Dionysia, blending worship, politics, and community. Quirky tidbit: some ancient theaters were designed so well acoustically that even whispers from the stage could be heard clearly in the highest seats, demonstrating the Greeks' obsession with craft and connection. Historians still debate whether this was intentional engineering or lucky happenstance. You pull the mask closer, feeling its weight, the rough edges reminding you that every story, every performance, is imperfect, yet perfect in its ability to capture something true. You realize now that boredom isn't just a lack of excitement but a resistance to change. Dionysus, in all his chaotic glory, teaches you to lean into discomfort, to embrace transformation, to find freedom in uncertainty. As the night deepens, you tuck the mask away gently, promising yourself to carry a little of this madness forward, to seek stories, to step onto whatever stage life offers, and to never settle for the dull. Because sometimes, the best cure for boredom is not distraction, but daring to become someone, or something, else entirely. Dawn creeps in soft and pale as you walk the city streets one last time, the quiet hum of early risers mingling with the distant bleating of goats. You feel lighter somehow, as if the stories you've lived alongside have peeled away layers of dullness and left something sharper behind, a keen edge of curiosity. You pause by an old olive tree, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like the arms of a restless dancer, and you remember that this is where Dionysus might have once stood, surveying a world full of dull routines and tired gods. He didn't invent theater merely to entertain, he built it as a refuge, a revolt, a place where boredom could be ripped apart by laughter, tears, and the wild unpredictability of human folly. Mainstream historical fact: the Dionysia festival, held in honor of Dionysus, was one of the most important civic and religious celebrations in ancient Athens, blending performance with deep communal meaning. Quirky tidbit: some scholars speculate that the frenzy associated with Dionysus' cult influenced early forms of theater to include trance-like states and ecstatic dance, which still find echoes in modern performance arts. Historians still argue how much of Dionysian worship was theatrical performance and how much was raw religious experience. You look up at the pale morning sky, the faintest breeze stirring the olive leaves. The mask you carried feels like a relic from another life, one where gods walked among men, and stories shaped the world. Now, as you prepare to leave this place, you carry the lesson that theater, born from boredom and divine mischief, is a living thing. It grows, shifts, and invites you to become part of its endless play. And maybe, just maybe, that's why Dionysus gave it to us, not to escape boredom, but to dance with it.